Thank you to the organizers for allowing me to be here with you and to be able to describe little known pages of the Italian army that took part to the Italian campaign and the War of Liberation. My paper will be focused on the role played by the paratroopers and the Arditi, brave soldiers, of the Italian army in breaking the Gustav line. Therefore, I ask you to let me take you by hand and follow me in this account on the events of the 184th Naval Infantry Parachute Division, the 185th Naval Autonomous Parachute Battalion, and the 9th Assault Combat Team and the Valenti Patriots Band. Before I begin my telling, I ought to describe who were these men we are going to talk about. The soldiers of these combat units and of the Valenti Patriots Band were all volunteers. Since time immemorial, the volunteer is a fighter figure that has fascinated and frightened because he embodies and lives deeply, almost viscerally, the concept of homeland, like a pure, ardent, and unquenchable love. In the case of the parachutists and Arditi volunteers, it is necessary to realize that we are dealing with personnel who, in terms of physical and moral qualities, training, equipment, and armament, were an elite. Being a volunteer was a central element because the concept of voluntarism for both the parachutists and the Arditi merged with the concept of mass, heroism, and warrior exaltation. The voluntary choice of paratroopers and Arditi exalt the individual, leading to the establishment of a sort of aristocracy of fighters. In this context, the parachutists and the Arditi specialties were characterized by strong esprit de corps and a vigorous sense of belonging. All these elements also had positive repercussion from an operational and tactical point of view. In fact, the specialties were characterized by deep tactical ductility and the marked ability to adapt to any operational and combat environment. For the combat units examined, in addition to voluntarism, we cannot overlook the training and what were the operational aims, both at the tactical and strategic level. For the Arditi and paratroopers, training was aimed at creating chosen soldiers capable of operating in that theater of war, of facing any people, of enemy, and of practice and sustaining any form of combat. All this contributed to creating a fighter capable of moving even in total autonomy and operating in any war scenario. The parachutist volunteer and the Arditi volunteer were daring and unscrupulous and had to be quick in their decision and action and know how to exploit a surprise, develop intuition, initiative and autonomy, and constantly maintain an offensive tactical attitude, guided by a cold and calculated ardor. My speech must begin with 8th September 1943 and the repercussion that the signing of the armistice had for the Italian Army, Arditi, and paratroopers units. On the evening of 8th September 1943, when the announcement of the armistice was made by radio, the paratroopers and the Arditi were present in several locations of the peninsula and in Sardinia, Calabria, Tuscany, and Lazio. The Naval Division and the 1st Battalion of the 10th Arditi Regiment were in Sardinia. In an anti-landing role, aliquots of paratroopers were present in the Sun Barracks in Florence, and the 185th Naval Parachute Regiment was in full retreat from Calabria, South Italy. In the areas of Viterbo, Tarquinia, and Florence, there were also aliquots of the 1/8 Ciclone Infantry Parachute Division, EI, the 3rd Parachute Division that was being formed. Also in Lazio, between Rome, Viterbo, Tarquinia and Santa Severa, were the other 3 battalions of the 10th Arditi Regiment. The news of the armistice split the Italian armed forces and generated often conflicting personal and group feelings. Even for the paratroopers and Arditi units, 8 September 1943 was a moment of rupture, in which the soldiers were called upon to make choices. Being, however, in the presence of an elite with a strong sense of belonging and a high esprit de corps, most of the men remained loyal to Italy, the institution and oath that they had taken. Unfortunately, the most dramatic moment took place in Sardinia because a defecting parachute battalion who continued to follow the German units killed Colonel Alberto Becchi Luserna, who was Chief of Staff of the Nembo Parachute Division. Many parachutists and Arditi immediately took up arms against the Germans, especially in Tuscany and Lazio. Precisely in this region, a guerrilla band in Lazio, a guerrilla band composed exclusively of Arditi and paratroopers, was born on 13th September 1943, which would be known as the Valenti Patriots Band, and whose members identified themselves as paratroopers patriots. This band operated until the liberation of Rome, carry out actions of both a strategic and tactical nature, always wearing the Italian army uniform and military insignia. The operational methods of the Valenti Band were those characteristics of the guerrilla warfare, both in urban and extra-urban environments, which saw the carrying out of sabotage, information, and guerrilla actions. These activities were flanked by those of assisting stragglers and of prevent useless destruction and massacres when the front collapsed. The Valenti Band was articulated around 10 operational squads, most of which operate in Rome and the surrounding areas. In the extra-urban sector operated 2 other squads, one in the Tarquinia area and one in the Poli area. In red you can see the Gustav line. Altogether, between September 1943 and June 1944, the Valenti Band carried out 38 actions between sabotage and guerrilla actions. This activity intensified because of the Allied landing at Anzio-Nettuno, and in April saw the planning of a major action against the prison in Via Tasso, which, however, never saw the light of day. Unfortunately, the paratroopers of the Valenti Band had to suffer numerous losses, among those arrested and shot, including some in the Ardeatine massacres, especially between March and May 1944. In the context of what we are discussing today, the action of the Valenti Patriots Band must be seen as strategic in nature. Every single tactical act carried out using the characteristic techniques of the guerrilla warfare responded to needs of the Anzio-Nettuno or Cassino front. In fact, the band was in contact with, with the leaders of the Roman resistance, who were in daily contact with the Allied. After the liberation of Rome, a part of these patriots of the Valenti Band continue to make their contribution in the War of Liberation by following the paratroopers and the Arditi units that were framed within the Italian Liberation Corps. Let us now describe what happened to those combat units that instead, after 8 September 1943, remained firmly in place and remained above all, faithful to the Italian institution and the oath they had taken. In January 1944, we find the 185th Nembo Parachute Regiment in Puglia, undergoing reorganization under the order of Major Massimino. It was precisely this reorganization that caused the unit's personnel to shrink considerably, bringing it down to battalion level and causing it to change its name in 185th Nembo Parachute Battalion and then to 185th Nembo Arditi Parachute Team. In February 1944, the unit was included within the 1st Motorized Division, a light division of the Italian Army, the 1st division to come back after the 8th September on the front line against the German troops. Being deployed behind the Gustav Line in Rocchetta Nuova area. Subsequently, it was transferred to Castelnuovo with the task of testing the real consistency of the German units guarding Monte San Michele. During those weeks, through reinforced patrols, the paratroopers operating in the San Michele and Mainardi sector. Monte San Michele would be definitely occupied by the paratroopers only on 19th May 1944. It was a particularly violent action as a result of the fierce German resistance. Between 25th and 26th March, the division came under the dependencies of the Polish Army Corps, belonging to the British 8th Army. It was in this new context of dependencies that the motorized division was ordered to occupy Monte Marrone, an action in which the 185th Nembo paratroopers played a key role. The combat unit of the motorized division moved in the night of 30-31st March and succeeded in occupying Monte Marrone. The new positions were immediately prepared for defense, waiting for a German counterattack. The German attack took place during the night of the 10th April. The Wehrmacht units managed to break through the barbed wire fences, resulting in an extremely violent tussle in which bursts of automatic weapons, hand grenades, and hand-to-hand combat alternated. The German action, however, was blocked, and the attackers forced to retreat. The action of the Italian paratroopers, mortars, and anti-tank guns was decisive to block the German counterattack. The artillery fire, in fact, was direct at the enemy's rear, hitting the reinforcement units that were heading for the line of battle. The deployment of the 185th Nembo Parachute Battalion on the Gustav Line ended in the first days of June, when an entire combat unit was withdrawn from the front and transferred to Brindisi to take part in the Operation Batepist, a strategic war drop on Florence area in Tuscany in support of partisan units and allied forces, but the operation, however, was never carried out. It should be noted that precisely in this context of the insertion of patrols behind the Gustav Line, the 185th Nembo Parachute Battalion provide many paratroopers to Italian military intelligence service, which parachuted numerous operators into the Apennine area in support of the partisan bands. This was the case, for example, of two patrols that between 12th and 13th March 1944 were released between Abruzzo and Marche. In the Visso Macereto area, the paratroopers were under the orders of Lieutenant Italo Gastaldi and had the task of making contact with the local partisan bands to organize and coordinate resistance activity in the area in order to make a strategic contribution to the breakthrough of the Gustav Line. On 18th March, during a roundup in Visso area, the patrols were surrounded by German SS units and 3 paratroopers and 2 civilians were shot. At this point, we come to describe the large Italian combat unit that was to constitute the main maneuvering mass of the Italian Liberation Corps, the 184th Nembo Infantry Parachute Division. The Nembo Division, which had been in Sardinia since the summer of 1943, was greatly downsized and reorganized as a result of what happened after 8 September 1943. Despite this, it continued to remain a leading unit of the Italian army, and for this reason, its return to the mainland and including in the Italian Liberation Corps was ordered. On 7th May 1944, the first to land in Naples were the soldiers of the 183rd Parachute Regiment, followed by those of the 184th. Transferred to Sannio, the division received an artillery regiment and became a maneuver unit of the Italian Liberation Corps. Although the official entry of the Nembo into the Italian Liberation Corps should be placed on 26 May, the 184 Parachute Regiment was on the front line as early as 20th of the month. Specifically, the regiment took part in the Battle of Monte Cavallo, which took place between 27th and 28th May, and where significant German resistance was encountered. This action must be seen as a part of the general maneuver that was leading to the definitive demolition of the Gustav Line. In the early days of June, the Italian Liberation Corps came under the British 5th Army Corps, and as a result of this, the operational sector was moved to the Adriatic, to Treglio in the south of Pescara. The Italian replaced the 4th Indian Division, occupying the northeastern sector of the Maiella. During the morning of 8th June, the Nembo combat units went into action, conquering the localities of Crecchio, San Romano, Canosa, Sannita, Orsogna, our paratroopers, Orsogna, and Filetto. The city of Orsogna, for example, saw the paratroopers as the protagonists of a daring ride in the night between 8th and 9th June. With this example, you can understand really who were these soldiers, because that night the explorer platoon of the 13th Nembo Battalion, in fact, vegged itself into the German lines and, without being discovered, mocked the enemy by planting the Italian tricolor flag on the German observatory of Orsogna. Once the mission was accomplished, the paratroopers returned to their front line. On 9th June, the 38th Nembo Company was even managed to occupy Chieti. One of the protagonists of the liberation of Chieti was Adolfo Mastrantonio, a lieutenant of the 13th Nembo Battalion of the 184th Parachute Regiment. In those days, the Nembo was stationed in Villa Magna. When news came that bridges, road, and buildings in Chieti has been mined, General Giorgio Morigi, the general commandant of the division, thus ordered to the 13th Nembo Battalion to take Chieti in order to avoid further destruction. The action involved a main attack with the 38th Company and an outflanking maneuver with Lieutenant Mastrantonio's command platoon. It was Mastrantonio himself, guided by partisans, who reached the town undetected and having spotted the enemy position, ordered the assault. Taken by surprise and threatened with outflanking, the German units retreat without detonating the place's charges. The few activated fuses were snagged away by Mastrantonio's paratroopers. Chieti was free, and Lieutenant Mastrantonio was awarded by silver medal for military valor. In Chieti, the role played by the Nembo Division in the forcing of the Gustav Line came to the end, but continued until the end of the war. And so we come to the last elite unit of the Italian army, that with its action was among the protagonists of the breakthrough of the Gustav Line, the 1st Arditi Battalion, later renamed 9th Assault Combat Team. At the 8th September 1943, the 1st Arditi Battalion was under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Guido Boschetti and was deployed in Sardinia, like the Nemo Division, in an anti-landing role. To return to the continent, Boschetti's Arditi had to wait until 9th February 1944. Having landed in Naples, they went to the Scapoli area to be deployed on the Volturno Line. The battalion thus became part of the 1st Motorized Division and subsequently followed all the events of the Italian Liberation Corps and of the Italian combat groups. When the 1st Arditi Battalion, that pitch is a patrol of the Arditi on the Gustav Line. When 1st Arditi Battalion arrived at Scapoli, it occupied the position of Castelnuovo and San Vincenzo al Volturno, and on 20th March 1944, it changed its name from 1st Arditi Battalion to 9th Assault Combat Team, thus amounting to be in continuity with the Arditi of the First World War, and in particular with the 9th Assault Combat Team, who was protagonist of the conquest of Col Moschin. The change of denomination also entailed a change in the task required. The Army Arditi, in fact, were born and had been trained to carry out special operations and unconventional action in enemy territory. All this, however, was no longer necessary. In 1944, and all the preparation was channeled into conduction, recognition action, ambushes and raids against enemy units and against enemy infrastructure and defensive systems. Naturally, the 9th Assault Combat Team was also engaged as a simple light infantry unit, spending periods in the trenches and participating in the great offensive operations with the 1st Motorized Division and later with the Italian Liberation Corps. In any case, on the Gustav Line, the Arditi were the undisputed protagonists of deep patrols and hand-to-hand attacks, such as those at Castelnuovo or those that led to the occupation of Monte Marrone and Monte Cavallo. On Monte San Michele, the Arditi destroyed an enemy position and continued their recognize in occupied territory for several kilometers. On 18th February, Boschetti's Arditi crossed the difficult San Michele Gap and, with the favor of the darkness, reached the first height of Monte Castelnuovo, where they clashed with the Germans. Having got the better of the enemy, the Arditi continued they recognize, passing several kilometers beyond the German position on San Michele, where they had a further clash. On 26 May 1944, at 12 noon, the Arditi combat team carried out a coup d'etat between Montemare and Colle dell'Altare to occupy Balzo della Cicogna. The Arditi attacked the German position, exploited surprise, speed and violence of attack, and using only daggers and then grenades. Facing action, the Germans were disoriented and fled. At that point, the Liri Valley was completely unguarded. and the way to Rome was open. All the Arditi shouted, "To Rome! To Rome!" But the conduct of the war foresaw something else for the Italian army. The Arditi, at the order of the Italian combat unit, had to continue their pursuit into Abruzzo and then along the entire Adriatic sector. The pursuit of the retreating German from the Gustav Line continued uninterruptedly until 8th June, when the units arrived in the vicinity of Guardiagrele, near the Maiella mountain. This is the movement of the Arditi, and this is the area of Guardiagrele in Abruzzo region. Around 6 p.m., the 9th Assault Combat Team formed 2 columns that were proceed through Pennepiedimonte and Gessarola to occupy Guardiagrele. At the time, the locality was still strongly garrisoned by the Germans, who also enjoyed artillery support. The maneuver of the Arditi was conceived as a giant pincer that was supposed to close the enemy units in a pocket. As soon as the movement began, however, the Arditi were hit by intensive artillery fire that blocked the column coming from Gessarola. Only the 102nd Arditi Company managed to carry on to Guardiagrele, where arrived at the first light of the day. The town was found completely destroyed and abandoned by the Germans. Guardiagrele. Thus, Lieutenant Colonel Boschetti's soldiers had no choice but to go to the castle tower where the Italian tricolor flag was hoisted. With the occupation of Guardiagrele, the operational cycle inherent of the battles of the Gustav Line of the 9th Assault Combat Team could be considered concluded. In this paper, I have analyzed the events of the forcing of the Gustav Line from the perspective of Italian army, in particular from the eyes of an elite units of the Italian army, and from that of a band of patriots. From a moral point of view, having fought on the Gustav Line and in the rear was a decisive step in demonstrating to the Allies that the Italian soldiers was capable of making an effective contribution to the Italian campaign and the war of liberation, and that above all, the Anglo-Americans would be able to rely on him fully. The battles that were sustained from Monte Marrone to Monte Cavallo, from Monte San Michele to Monte Mare, from Chieti to Guardiagrele, were episodes to be framed in the operation of a strategic nature that led to the unhinging of an entire Gustav Line system. We are dealing with units composed of volunteers, extremely motivated and highly trained. The Italian Army's participation in the Battle of Gustav Line was paid dearly. This price, however, was necessary because it was precisely that tribute of blood that the Italians and the Allied armies shed on the peninsula that allows us to live in a free and democracy country today. Thank you.